Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
A Lewiston man wants to produce electricity at this 200-foot waterfall near the town of Elk River. But area residents say his plan would destroy the natural beauty of Elk Falls and would hurt their infant tourist industry. Tonight, a look at the rush to develop Idaho's streams and the growing environmental battle that surrounds it. Good evening. It's been called the gold rush of the 80s, and it's been nicknamed Hydromania. But the dozens of entrepreneurs who have moved swiftly to lay claim to Idaho's waterways say the small hydropower boom just makes good business sense. A little background might be in order. 10 years ago, in the midst of the national energy crisis, the federal government moved to force private utilities to buy power from outside producers. The idea was to reduce dependence on foreign oil, and that made the current boom possible. But what apparently made it irresistible was a rather hefty tax credit, 21%, enacted 4 years ago. Since then, hydropower filings nationally have skyrocketed from just under 100 prior to 1980 to more than 1,000 just 2 years later. Idaho has gotten more than its share for two reasons: the abundance of falling water and the Public Utilities Commission's decision to set rates for the power well above the national average. Right now, there are only 21 projects actually producing electricity in Idaho and 8 more scheduled to come online soon. Their combined output makes only a tiny dent in the state's energy needs. But all that could change if half or a third or even a fourth of the proposed projects actually survive. An industry that size could produce enough power to more than equal the output of an average coal-fired plant. But using water to produce electricity is not without environmental impacts, and the fight over where and how much is done could occupy environmentalists and sportsmen in the next decade almost as much as the wilderness issue has occupied them for the past 10 years. Two areas have already become major battlegrounds: Henry's Fork in the Island Park area, where fishermen fear that 4 proposed projects could damage their prized trout stream, and in the Salmon River drainage, where the issue is the cumulative impact of more than 3 dozen small plants on salmon and steelhead runs. But smaller, less well-known streams can cause trouble for developers too, as one Lewiston man has been finding out. KUID producer Ann Summerall visited Elk Falls this week, where local residents are fighting a company called High-Tech over a proposed 3-megawatt power plant that would divert some water from the falls. Here's her report.
There are several reasons we're opposing the project. One of them is aesthetics. The aesthetics of the falls we think will be ruined by the proposal. And secondly, there's an economic issue where we get to lose a recreation and tourism site that's extremely important for this area.
Most of the people who are talking about the impacts probably have never seen a small hydro project that's online. And I think that it's being blown up in people's minds into something that it's not.
A licensing exemption that was granted by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for the development of a hydroelectric project at this site has caused much controversy for the citizens of the Elk Falls area. Elk Falls, once the best-kept secret in northern Idaho, has become a haven for tourists and concerned citizens.
I would say we probably had more tourists in here this summer than we've had in the whole history of this since people started coming in here. And of course, it's all been generated by the controversy that has arisen over this project. Now, the proposed project will take off above the upper falls where the diversion dam will be and contour across the hillside above the 3 falls, and will come down over the ridge in front of you there, and either through that opening right there or just into the trees behind it, the 4-foot pipe will come down clear to the river below us here to a powerhouse that they'll build down along the edge of the river.
Technically, this approximately $5 million project, project number 6524 by High-Tech Incorporated, is licensed except for a special land use permit that must be granted by the U.S. Forest Service. High-Tech is compiling information for the environmental analysis of North Idaho's highest falls.
We've looked at geology, we've looked at fisheries, we've looked at wildlife, we've looked at the salamander, we've looked at visual impacts, we've looked at water flows, we've looked at peregrine falcon habitat. You name it, I think we've looked at it. I don't think there's very much that we haven't looked at.
The United States Forest Service will inspect the study and base their decision to deny or grant the special use permit after evaluating Elk River residents' reactions and Forest Service concerns.
The primary one, of course, is the aesthetics of the project. This area, as you know, is a set-aside designated recreation area. And that's our primary concern, is that we protect that visual quality. The water coming over the falls, as you can see down there, is a very much of a concern to us. How much of the water is the project going to utilize? And thirdly then is the soil erosion problem. There's very thin soils on top of these rocks here, and we've got to be sure the project does not cause any erosion or any resource damage. We're going to have to change our direction, really. That's what we're going to do, because it would bring in some roads. Even though they wouldn't be permanent roads, they'd be here for a while. And that's part of what his analysis is going to have to tell us, is he can do this with very low or very little impact on the area.
Elk River residents in opposition to the project band together 4 months ago and formed the Committee to Save Elk Creek Falls. Benefit barbecues, selling T-shirts, writing letters to the press, public officials, and Forest Service personnel, and securing over 2,500 names on petitions is their way of protesting the development of the falls. One name appearing on a petition was former Interior Secretary and Governor Cecil Andrus.
I had a letter from ex-Governor Cecil Andrus pertaining to this, and he is quite familiar with this area. He's originally from Orofino, and he is right along with us. He says he feels like there's absolutely no reason for them to put that in.
Due to the decline in the production of wood products, this once prospering logging town has been forced to pursue a new economic base. Recreation, tourism, and these concerns have formulated their opinions about the project.
Basically, Carl Hayward's plan would require that there be a swath of timber removed for approximately 2.5 miles across the face of the mountain opposite the creek and the trail system that the people from Elk River have established. This would not make a aesthetic appeal to people who want to see natural recreational facilities such as Elk Creek Falls, so I don't see how it can help but hurt any recreational potential. People would not walk out to see a strip of bare ground. If the water flow is cut down, as Mr. Hayward says it will be, then the spray zone at the base of the lower fall will be diminished very much. And that means that the moss that lives around the lower falls, almost a rainforest environment that exists there today would shrivel and disappear.
The time of the year when we being the general public, need this electricity, or need electricity as a whole, he won't be able to provide it for us. So it's a boondoggle. I mean, the whole thing is nothing but a boondoggle to make rich men richer.
I think that eventually it'll be just a trickle, that we won't have the good falls, waterfalls that we do have. And I think it'll just ruin the entire scenery there.
Mr. Hayward feels that Project 6524 will have an impact that should not be considered detrimental.
There are trade-offs that must be made no matter what we do, and consequently some of the things we will have an impact. We've never said there wouldn't be an impact over there. Some of the things that you might consider impacts are going to be that we are going to use part of the water that flows through the creek to turn the turbine. We are going to be impacting in some areas during the construction phase of the project, because we will be changing parts of the landscape in a short-term short-term type outlook. We're going to be making some of those changes, and you could look at those as being detrimental, and if you want to look at them that way. We don't really look at them that way.
The committee does not feel the project will generate jobs nor any advantages for the area, yet Mr. Hayward feels the project will help employment and increase the economic base.
What we plan on doing is, first of all, that there will be at least one full-time job for somebody in Elk River when this project is over, contrary to what's been printed in the paper and put out constantly by the people who are in opposition. In addition to that, we'll be paying somewhere in the realm of $25,000 to $35,000 a year in taxes to the county, which could well go to support another job within the county. In addition to that, there will also be some short-term construction jobs for people in Elk River while this project is being built.
This project is not only a question of economics.
It is emotional. It's something that people in Elk River are dedicated to. They love the falls.
Yes, we are absolutely emotional about it. And I think Mr. Haywood's emotional about it too, because it involves an awful lot of money. And he may say he's not emotional about it, but he'd be foolish if he weren't, because it involves an awful lot of money for his concern.
Elk Falls is, of course, only one of dozens of proposals throughout the state. We'll take a closer look at the whole small hydropower issue now, beginning with a man for whom small hydro has turned into a very important business. Vern Ravenscroft is a former legislator and Republican gubernatorial hopeful. He has a small generating facility on his ranch in Tuttle, owns part interests in other projects in various stages of development, and owns Consulting Associates, a business formed to help other potential power producers get through the bureaucratic red tape. Mr. Ravenscroft, you heard the gentleman on the videotape, and I quoted a term in my introduction that I know makes you see red. I said that some people call this a gold rush. How do you answer the charges of speculation, get rich quick at the expense of the water?
Gene, obviously, in the initial stages, there was a real gold rush atmosphere. You had to go out and get your stake in the ground ahead of someone else. That has diminished totally because at the very best, the better projects are an opportunity for an ongoing business. And I was very amused at the comment in the picture in which the gentleman referred to the rich get richer. Most of the people that I'm acquainted with are on their knees to every banker in the county in order to keep their operations rolling until such time as they eventually, 2, 3, or even 4 years in the future, begin to get a dribble of income from the project.
Can be fairly lucrative, though, once it gets going, can it
If you
not?
can outlive the bankers, because for the first 10 to 15 or 20 years even, you're involved in some high-scale financing, which takes the bulk of the income.
What's the potential, in your opinion? There are several hundred, no one seems to know exactly, ideas for sites. How many of those are actually viable, do you think?
I would not make any such an estimate because you've got to take each project in its own right. Our firm, primarily for clients, not in our own behalf, have examined well over 100 projects. We have attempted to move to license on less than a third of those. And when you then see the attrition from the standpoint of some of the unexpected things that crop up and some of the problems of finance and some of the problems of getting it not only licensed but also contracted for a market, I suspect that only a portion of those that we've attempted to license will ever go to construction. Under that set of circumstances, there is tremendous attrition, and I can summarize it only by saying there's far more ambition than there is ability to deliver.
How bad, in your opinion, is the red tape, if you will, that you have to go through?
My own project went through about 12 different examinations before it could get licensed. And then we had to repeat that in part when we were getting a contract for the sale of the power. And we had to go through a whole new set of reviews and procedures when we finally got financing for it. So in total, we probably answered detailed financial and technical problems for well over 20 different entities. It took us 4 years. We started in the summer of 1980, and we finally got the first kilowatts online on December 23rd of 1983.
Is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in your opinion, too concerned with the environmental impacts?
I've been surprised that the environmentalists have taken the line that they have in relation to the exemptions, because when it comes to exemptions, 2 agencies, in the event of an anadromous stream, 3 agencies, namely the Fish and Wildlife Department of the state, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Marine Fisheries, in the event of an anadromous stream, have total veto over the stipulations that are placed in that license. Now you go to a licensing procedure, then FERC sits in judgment, and the developer presents his case and his expert witnesses. The various environmental agencies and concerns bring in their case, and then FERC does set in judgment in relation to a license. The exemption,
So
there
you
was
think
veto on the part of the environmental agencies.
Let me change the subject just briefly, finally, and ask you about a state Supreme Court decision last week that appears to throw the security of the rate of return that these producers get over the life of their contract in some jeopardy. How serious is that to the industry?
Gene, I do not view the Idaho Supreme Court case of a week ago as the sky falling in. I think there are some questions that are raised by that decision that will need to have further interpretation, further examination by the PUC, perhaps even by the courts. It does clearly establish the right of the PUC to order contract and contract terms. It does clearly, in my view, establish a lesser criteria in the review and in further future examination of those contracts than the PUC has been using.
So the profit could go down.
The opportunity for examination in future of those contracts is very much implied by the ruling. But in turn, let me point out that the reaction of the financing entities will probably be the proof of the pudding. And even a rate structure that is examined from time to time by a regulatory body, namely the PUC, is far less hazardous, in my opinion, than the price of cows. And then the bankers are loaning money repeatedly on the price of cows.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Sportsmen and conservationists, as well as state and federal agencies, have opposed a number of projects in Idaho, including proposed generating facilities at Henry's Fork and in the Salmon River drainage. Edwin Stockley is a lawyer, and the founding member of the Idaho Natural Resources Legal Foundation. That organization was formed about 7 months ago, in part to organize the legal opposition to these power projects. Mr. Stockley, you heard Mr. Ravenscroft's view of how this process works. His indication is that the environmental concerns are well addressed in the federal process. What's your view of that?
Well, my view and the view of the federal agencies is that they are not well addressed. In the past, it is not at all clear that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which we call FERC, has honored the objections of the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service.
So this veto that Mr. Ravenscroft talks about hasn't always worked?
It has not always worked. The National Wildlife Federation, in its Portland office, has intervened at the FERC level in many of these proposals and has, along with the two federal agencies, pressed forward the environmental and conservation objections. I think in this area, perhaps it's more of a conservation rather than an environmentalist. And one of the complaints that the National Wildlife Federation has made continuously is that FERC is not paying any attention to the other federal agencies, even though the statutes seem to require it.
You fought at one point to get the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to consider what's termed the cumulative impact of projects in, for instance, the Salmon River drainage. Is that fight dead?
Oh no, that fight's not dead. The National Wildlife Federation is making it on the FERC level. We are making it, the Idaho Natural Resources Legal Foundation. We are making it through the Forest Service, through the Bureau of Land Management if they're involved at all. And we're attempting to use the Council on Environmental Quality requirements that a lead agency be designated to prepare an environmental impact statement to discuss the cumulative effect of these projects.
Just briefly, what projects in Idaho concern you the most right now, and what kinds of problems do you see with them?
Well, the projects that we're concerned about are the projects that would be located on a free-flowing natural stream.
As opposed to, say, an irrigation canal or an existing dam.
Right, exactly. And we are particularly concerned with projects that you've mentioned in the Salmon River drainage and Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Clearwater. The anadromous fish are an extraordinarily valuable resource to the nation as a whole, certainly to the Northwest. And not only are they valuable to Idaho, but to the ocean fishermen coming out of Washington, coming out of Alaska, coming out of Canada. And Idaho in the past has been a prime breeding ground for the Chinook salmon and other salmon. It is much of the breeding area has been destroyed, and the salmon have faced extraordinary hardships getting here. But now a great deal of federal money is being spent to restore the breeding areas, to make it more possible for the salmon to get here. And at the same time, the federal government is seeking to approve these projects that pose a real threat to this very valuable resource.
So you see some serious inconsistency there.
Very, very much so, yes.
Thank you. We'll come back in just a moment. Up until now, small power producers in Idaho have enjoyed one of the highest rates in the country because of the Public Utility Commission's interpretation of federal law and because of its desire to get the industry on a stable financial footing. But as we mentioned earlier, a state Supreme Court decision late last week may have put those rates in some jeopardy. Dick High is one of the state's 3 public utilities commissioners. He and the 2 Democrats on the commission have generally seen eye to eye on the need to foster small power production. Commissioner High, let me ask you first. Do you share any of the concerns that Mr. Stockley expresses about protection of the environment as these projects go forward?
Well, I think it's fair to say that my assumption is that any energy development, whether it's under cogeneration, small power, or done by a private utility, has to comply with some basic environmental criterion. And I might add, too, that with respect to our approval of cogeneration projects, we've not looked at any environmental factors.
You can't really, can you?
We're prohibited from it. In fact, it's been preempted by the federal government.
As far as you can see from your vantage point, are those concerns looked at by anyone well enough?
Well, I've always assumed that they were being taken care of. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion in that.
Let me ask you about this court decision last week that, as I understood it, essentially said that you could no longer fix a rate of return over a period of a long-term contract. How serious do you think that is for this whole developing industry?
I'm not sure yet. Probably we need a clearer understanding of exactly what the court meant by its decision. I think it's fair to say that the commission felt that in setting rates at the avoided cost, which is required by the National Energy Act.
What it would cost
yes,
to build in this case, thermal
plant. We were on very solid ground, particularly in view of 2 U.S. Supreme Court decisions which validate that loud and clear. I think the question now is that when we set an avoided cost, in other words, we set the market price at which the utilities pays for power produced by these independent entrepreneurs. When we set that price, we set it on 2 elements: the fixed cost, that's repayment of the cost of building the plant, and their variable cost, which is equivalent to purchasing coal, which is going to vary over time. And if I understand the court's decision, they said that this fixed cost can be reviewed at some later date, including the price paid for that recovery of capital, and also the terms, the length of period over which it's recovered. So this comes as quite a, well, I must say, a very substantial surprise in view of what we'd felt previously.
The commission recently lowered Washington Water Power's cogeneration rate by about 25%. Does that signal that the commission is perhaps looking at the energy surplus situation and rethinking the way it's gone about constructing those rates?
Yes, in fact, if we do our job right, we will factor in the fact that there's a low cost or an energy surplus which results in ability for utilities to buy low cost power just from Bonneville surplus or various surpluses. And if you take a 30 or 35 year contract and factor in those 5 or 6 years of very low value electricity, you end up with a lower cost over the 35-year contract, and that's essentially what's happening.
Let me open this up and go back to these other 2 gentlemen. We don't have much time left, so I'll ask you to be brief. Does that, Mr. Stockley first, does that make you, if the price goes down, presumably there'll be fewer of those. Is that something you'd like to see happen?
Oh, yes. Yes, I think so. I want to make it clear that we are not opposed to the concept of cogeneration. We are opposed to putting these plants in dangerous spots from the point of view of natural resources. If they're going to go in those spots, perhaps your construction costs are going to be higher because there's going to be road building associated with them and things like that, so that they're less likely to go there if the money's not available.
Does it work that way, Mr. Ravenscroft, that the ones that might be more environmentally sensitive tend to be more expensive and less...
Gene, there's one key point that I've got to inject, and I'm evading your question just a little bit.
Fine, go ahead, we don't.
You've got to judge these projects one at a time upon their merits. The project at Elk River was cited as an example. I don't know the project, so I'm not going to comment on it. But I do know that you'll soon be hearing about a project over at Chalice. They have a situation where a stream that has dramatically increased its flow is dumping over 60 cubic foot per second of 90-degree mud into the Salmon River. And by building a project, we can avoid that situation and clean it up. That project will have the endorsement not only of the local agencies and the local people, but also of the local representatives of the Idaho Conservation League. On my own project, we were able to create, by putting water out in a bunch of old abandoned gravel pits, create some 30 to 40 acres of nesting habitat for wildlife, waterfowl, bass ponds, and created a wetland situation where there used to be spent gravel pits.
So there can be positive environmental...
Very well can be positive, and that's a story that's not been told often enough or loud enough. Now, what was your question?
My question essentially was the Public Utilities Commission appears to be, and I'm speculating more than anything else here, but appears to be headed down a road where rates will come down. Does that concern you?
That, I think, is short term, and I would not argue, at least very long, loud, and publicly, that they should not include the short-term impact of the surplus. That does have some bearing upon the avoidance that is possible. In the long run, I would make the statement in clarification, and that is that when you look to new energy, whether it be hydro, coal-fired, nuclear, or whatever, the price that is now being quoted for cogeneration and small hydro in Idaho is the cheapest new source of energy that the consumer can get from any source.
We have only less than a minute left. Commissioner High, let me ask you a question that I asked Mr. Ravenscroft early on. How big do you think the potential of this is? And I'm speaking now specifically about the hydropower.
I think it's substantial, particularly if the environmental impact can be mitigated. The USBR, I believe it was, some federal agency a number of years ago did an analysis of simply elevation drops of water in Idaho and came up with something like 5,000 megawatts of potential power. Now,
So
we all know
story.
that's not all going to be developed, but the magnitude is tremendous.
A story we'll be looking at for a long
Yes.
time. Thank all of you for being with me. Commissioner Dick High, Ed Stockley, Vern Ravenscroft.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night. I'm Jean McNeil. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.